we threw a Star Trek countdown up here. IEW just walked around. Oh, well, that's. Is that on that?
Oh, I forgot all about this paper.
What was the panel before?
Let me see it. How do you feel?
Digital.
It was inking. Digital inking.
Yeah, digital inking.
Oh, I missed this paper. Like, sort of-
Yeah, me too. Vinny and I were just talking about like this. Vinny likes to be glossy. I prefer that.
Yeah, I know. I forgot. Yeah, comics used to be like this.
So how much BSing do you think you four can do between yourselves?
Plenty.
We'll see. We'll just argue with each other.
That would be wonderful. You want to
Please
leave me
do.
out? Yeah, please. We'll have
Could
a
you
crowd in no
violently
time.
disagree with one another?
That'd be good.
Happily.
You and I should.
It sounds like somebody's dragging your body. Can you hear it? It's not just me, right?
What? The reverb?
No, the dragging body. Yeah, how are the mics in here? Ooh, much better than that other one this morning.
Yeah.
Earlier.
Everything sounds pretty good.
Yeah.
Nice.
We did a panel earlier where it was like God voice on everything.
I've seen that too. How it was that weird like up from
It was
above.
like and it was Dopplering, so we couldn't. We'd be looking at the moderator up here on the panel. You couldn't understand what he was asking, and then he'd be like, Josh, what are you thinking? He'd be like, I'm taking a stab at this answer. I don't even know what you were asking. So. Hi, I'm Greg.
Hi, Greg.
Hey, you guys, why don't you introduce yourselves?
I just did.
Other than Greg.
I'm Christopher Sebela.
I'm Shawn Aldridge.
I'm Joshua Williamson.
All right, you guys. This is probably one of the funner panels, Body in the Gutters. It is crime comics, crime, all sorts of fun things of that nature. Like they said, we have Greg Rucka or Rucka?
Rucka.
Rucka. So we got Greg Rucka.
Rhymes with the popular profanity.
And he's a smart ass, so this should be fun.
Reasonably smart.
You know.
Educated. I'm an educated ass.
Shawn Aldridge, Joshua Williamson, and Chris Sebela. Is everybody from Oregon?
What, originally or currently?
We all live here
all-
now.
Yeah, we all live here.
You all live here now.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm from out of state as well. I don't know if you can tell from the accent, but where are you originally from?
Starting here, I was born in California, went to college in New York, did my graduate school in Southern California, and then fled up here in '93. And I've been up here ever since.
Did you go to school for writing or anything?
Yeah, my graduate work was, went to USC in a program called the Masters of Professional Writing. Yeah, which was basically a half-assed MFA. You went in and it really was. It was a Hollywood MFA. Their whole thing was you will be able to write anything, and I took courses in technical writing and playwriting and biography and play, you name it. And graduate school for writing is one thing and one thing only. It is an opportunity / excuse to sit your ass down and do nothing but write for hopefully 18 to 36 months. And if you're exceptionally lucky, and I was, you will find not good instructors, but a good peer group that you can sit with and share your work with, and they will give you honest critique, as opposed to the thing that most writers have to suffer through, which is most pre-published writers, in my experience, when they get together with other pre-published writers, it becomes a bunch of defensive ego stuff. Nobody is willing to offer constructive criticism for fear of destructive criticism coming back on them. Finding people that you can actually work with honestly and who you understand will say, well, Greg, this sucked, and the reason I thought it sucked was this, and not iterate that to mean they think you suck, but that the work failed in these ways and that these are ways to maybe consider making it better. That's a rare thing. So,
Rather than just an instructor or somebody just yelling at you,
Yeah, I mean,
telling you, talking at you.
We're way off. We're way off the reservation on this. But I'll tell you, I mean, I had come out of a liberal arts college. I went into graduate school. The first course I took my first day at USC was what was it? It was a short story workshop, and it was taught by a guy who used to write on the Ephraim Zimbalist FBI TV show named Ben Masselink. He was this crusty old surfer dude in his mid-70s. His hair was bleached white and straight. I mean, just so white. And leathery skin, really cheerful, Hawaiian shirt, board shorts, missing most of his right index finger because it had been bitten off by a shark.
Awesome.
And we're sitting there, and that first day of class, he said, anybody have a story here and whatnot? And some guy starts reading his story, and it was, and I'm going to apologize in advance for this right now, because if any of you have written this story, I'm now about to savage it, and this is not a personal referendum, but he starts reading his story about how, and it's a 3-page story about the kid who's at his grandparents' house in the woods, and the grandparents leave him alone, and he finds the shotgun. And at that point, there are 3 endings to this story. There are only 3. The first one is he kills himself. The second one is he kills either grandma or grandpa. Or the third one is he kills a small woodland creature. All right? In the first iteration, it's going to end with, and I'm a ghost. And the second iteration, it's a crime story or a tragedy. And in the third one, it's about the sanctity of life. And lo and behold, 10 minutes later, the kid has blown away a squirrel, and he's holding the body, and he's going, why? And it was, I'm in graduate school. And this is the first thing, you know, and I'm painfully aware how much we're spending. This is the first story, right? And nobody in the room wants to say anything. Masselink's like, anybody have any comments? And you could hear a pin drop. And somebody says, sounds like it's kind of based on real events. And he says, yeah, I don't hunt anymore. I only shoot things with a camera.
Oh.
And there's silence again, and Ben says, okay, well, if nobody has an eye, I'm like, I can't. I say, okay, I have some issues. What's that? And the first thing, and I was softballing. I was like, the point of view is all over the place. Now, I can't tell if this is supposed to be first person or a limited third or a third omniscient. Masselink says, oh, wait, you understand point of view? Everybody, listen to him. I'm like, holy crap, what have I gotten myself into?
This is at a prestigious...
Yeah, this was the USC Master of Professional Writing, so there you go.
That's always fun. So, Christopher,
Sorry.
moving on down the line. No.
I'm really sorry.
That was
Yeah, I have
wonderful,
nothing to
actually.
follow
Long
that up
story.
with.
I think that's why people come to these panels, actually, is for a good story or two, so that was perfect.
Yeah, I'm gonna fail.
Grew up here, or?
Huh?
Grew up
No,
here?
I grew up in Chicago, and then I spent some years in Kansas City, and then moved.
Sorry to hear that.
No, it's the Paris of the Plains. Like, it's not bad. But it's still in the Midwest, and I spent my life dying every summer and wanting to die every winter. So, so I took the last of my money. Basically, it was either I could stay in Kansas City and try and figure out how to make a living, because that's when the economy really hit me, or I could move to Portland with the remaining amount of my money and try to make it in comics. So that's what I did.
Seemed to work out.
So far, could be better, but I'm trying not to be. I'm trying to manage my expectations. So.
Well, very cool. Shawn, did you grow up here?
No, I actually originally grew up in Kentucky in a small house in the woods that my grandparents would frequently leave me alone at. And then one day I shot a squirrel and decided to move to Portland, Oregon. No, I originally am from Kentucky. I moved out here in 2000.
Did you always want to write?
Yeah, I always did. I think I don't recall wanting to do something else. Though for 2 years I was in chemical engineering school.
Oh boy.
Yeah, that wasn't fun. Yeah, I wanted to cook meth. So.
Yeah.
But no, I was like, oh, cool, I can do chemical engineering and make plastics and make a lot of money. And then I realized, like, I don't really want to make plastics or money, so I'll do comics.
Yeah.
You would have ended up in Delaware at DuPont or something like that. Joshua, here.
No, I'm from Southern California. I was born and raised, and I moved up here about 5 years ago.
Oh, very cool. Did you always want to write?
Yeah, it's actually kind of, I guess, a little different. I wanted to be an editor, actually, when I was a kid. I wanted to be an editor or an art director. So I went to school for graphic design to study to become an art director. And then when I was in the dorms, all I knew were artists. That's all I knew. I knew a bunch of wannabe writers, people who would say they wanted to write comics. And we were trying to put together an anthology, and I was basically being the art director editor on this anthology and trying to put together teams of writers and artists, and none of the writers would do any writing. They just wouldn't do it. So I ended up writing all of the stories for the artists, and then kind of from there started writing comics. But I worked as an art director for a while before I fully transitioned to being a freelance writer.
Oh, it sounds like you got your practice in, though.
Yeah, it was fun.
So I'm going to work just back down the opposite way. What drew you towards crime comics?
Oh man, I don't know how to say this in the best way possible. So I'm gonna say it. Some people know this about me, some people don't. When I was a kid, I was dumb, and I got in a lot of trouble with the law. And so a lot of my experiences kind of came from that. I kind of became obsessed with it. I saw a lot of things from different angles. Yeah, I definitely saw things from the other side of the bar, I guess is the best way to put it. And so when I was there, I just became very much more interested in crime. And so when I started working in comics, it was always kind of in my head. They say, write what you know. Well, that's kind of what I was doing.
Well, that's very cool. Now you have a couple titles.
Yeah, I work on a book called Ghosted. It's a crime horror comic through Image. Essentially, it's Ocean's 11, but in a haunted house instead of a casino. And then I do a book called Masks and Mobsters, which is a digital book through Monkey Brain and Comixology that is about essentially what was going on with the mob and organized crime once superheroes and supervillains started showing up. Because you can pay off a judge and you can pay off cops, but you can't pay off Tony Stark. And with criminals, with supervillains, they weren't paying up. You know, like if you commit a crime in a town that's run by the mob, you have to pay up, and supervillains weren't. And so you have this mob family of trying to figure out ways of dealing with this new, the golden age of superheroes.
It's a different idea. It's
Yeah.
very neat. So working our way down, once again, the opposite way down to Shawn.
Well, I guess most of my family were criminals. I wasn't. I shouldn't say that. It was only my uncles and a few aunts. Seriously, my uncle once gave me a knife that he had stabbed a man with. He
That's
was
an
like, "I
interesting
think you're
gift.
ready to have this," and I'm like, "I really don't want
He
it."
wanted you to hide it. Is really
Yeah,
what it was
yeah.
all about.
Can you wipe the
So that
fingerprints
was
off
always
first?
interesting, but I think a lot of it just came from my reading. I'm a huge Chester Himes fan.
Very
I
cool.
absolutely love him, and he's highly underrated, not just as a crime writer, but as a African American writer of that time period. I
I
think,
just started reading Cotton Comes to Harlem again.
yeah. I mean,
Love that book.
he's brilliant, and it's such a picture of Harlem at that time, where just crazy stuff happens.
Well, and you guys, you know who Chester Himes is?
No,
This is a crime in the world. Chester
Yeah.
Himes is and I'm not sure on the bio. He was a black writer.
Yeah.
He started writing in prison. And he's really one of the overlooked and great crime novelists of sort of, I want to say, mid-20th century. And he's got these two wonderful characters. Was it Cotton Joe and Grave? I'm missing.
Gravedigger
Gravedigger
Ed
Ed
and Coffin Joe.
and Coffin Joe.
Or Gravedigger Jones and
It was in Coffin Ed.
There we go.
There it is. I knew it was.
Yeah.
It was.
We'll always bust
clicking
into our
wrong.
room and say, "Count off."
So they influenced both of you.
Yeah,
Oh, he did.
I love Chester Himes. All of his books. His first, his essentially autobiographical prison novel. They just re-released the unedited version, the version that wasn't written for white people, called "Tomorrow Will Make You Cry," or "Yesterday Will Make You Cry," and it's just absolutely beautiful. And when it originally was printed, it was, there was some race issues in America at one time. I think we're all aware of this. So his editors essentially stripped half of it down and said, nobody white wants to read this, and we have to make it safe for them. And this new press that just had gotten some of the stuff re-released it, and it's as excellent. I mean, it's just a beautiful, well-written prison life thing, and you see like what would become the crime novels, the Harlem Cycle and stuff. But it was Chester Himes. It was authors more so that got me into. I'm like, I love this stuff. I'm still trying to figure out who owns the rights to the Harlem Cycle stuff, because I would eventually like to translate those into graphic novels. But
They made a movie.
Yeah, Rage in Harlem.
Yeah.
That's not very good.
So you working on anything now?
I've got a few things that I can't mention. I've said this like and I'm sorry. I
No,
mean, it's
that's
just
fine.
like the nature of the biz.
What about your previous work?
Vic Boone, which is not necessarily a crime book. I mean, crime happens, but it's sort of it's Ed Wood if Ed Wood had written Blade Runner. That's what Vic Boone is. It's goofy science fiction from the 1950s mixed with private eye fiction of the same era.
It's actually great stuff. It won a couple of awards, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
yeah. It won a Stumptown. It won an IGN Editor's Choice. A few hundred people have read it. It's good.
Absolutely. Working our way down.
I don't know where. I think I severely got into crime back in like 2009 or so. Like I was just sort of worn out, and like crime fiction is just so short and punchy if you get the good stuff. So I had no crime novels outside of like James M. Cain or Dashiell Hammett, and so I went on a re-education binge and spent like, in retrospect, I spent way too much money considering that like all my jobs would go away before the end of the year. So what I had left was a huge bookshelf full of crime fiction that I really enjoyed. But so I don't know. I've never gotten in trouble with the law. Well, I got in trouble with the law once when I was a kid for breaking a garage door, and they locked me in a cell, and then I also watched police beat my babysitter at the same time. So it's a little weird, but it'd take too long to unpack here. But you know, I understand, I guess, or I want to understand the impulse of like when you sort of move past this sort of like, well, that would be kind of neat to, I'm getting a gun and I'm going to walk into this place and take all their money. So yeah, I don't know.
Then you started writing books like High Crimes.
Yeah, High Crimes was like I was sort of like fixated on trying to figure out a crime book, and I had been obsessed with Mount Everest for years. And every time I've read John Krakauer's Into Thin Air like 5 or 6 times. And
You read The Climb?
what the Book Reeves book?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not as big a fan of that.
Well,
I'm
depends
just
on where you
saying.
come down. It depends on where you come down on that argument.
I think Krakauer was right, but that's. But every time I would read, there's a section climbing Mount Everest called the Khumbu Icefall, which is it's this shifting glacier full of crevasses, and you have to like strap 2 aluminum ladders together and walk across them in crampons, like. The deadliest part of the climb, and climbers have to go through it like 8 or 9 times just to get to the top of Mount Everest because they're acclimatizing, and like there are ice racks that are like the size of skyscrapers that will fall over at random. So I was like, well, what if somebody brought a gun there and started shooting? And that was kind of the genesis of High Crimes, and then trying to figure out like how to have heroes who are criminals, but not criminals that you can root for, who are basically just sort of the basis of all noir, which is broken people making bad decisions.
So not your typical anti-hero, just someone you wanted to win.
Yeah, and I don't even know if, like, you know, our main character is a drug addict, and she's, you know, sort of avoiding all her responsibilities and on the run, and she's also, you know, a high-altitude grave robber. Like, she's kind of got all these horrible qualities, but that's kind of a challenge, is, like, how can you make somebody who does all these terrible things and makes all these bad choices, how can you, like, look past that to see, like, somebody that you actually care about? So...
What any other previous titles? I know you can't talk about anything new.
Yeah, like my, actually the first book I ever did, Screamland, was a murder mystery, but it was with monsters at a comic book convention. So I made the great decision of my first book being the two worst selling genres of comics, which is horror and comedy. And then I'm doing Ghost. I'm co-writing Ghost with Kelly Sue DeConnick at Dark Horse, which is sort of a crime book, sort of supernatural crime book. And then yeah, I've got a couple other things that are in the works. Like I'm just sort of getting all my crime fixation out in one fell swoop. So.
Well, very cool. We'll move right on down to Greg. Just hear him talk a little bit more about some fun stuff. We need some more stories. What about you? What really drove you towards crime? I have some of your books. I have some written down. I got some questions for you. But what drove you towards the crime?
Well, honestly, I think it was just I grew up in the golden age of television private eyes, and I grew up in a family that read all the time and read a lot of mysteries. So the two sort of combined. You know, I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out why crime stories and what is the appeal and so on. I don't tend to write criminals as much as I tend to write stories about people dealing with the results and following up on. I like police stories. I like stories that deal with subcultures that that for the most part we are not privy to. And I suppose there's always certain, you know, like my first novel, Keeper, was written because I was desperately trying to figure out the mentality of somebody who could justify murdering a doctor, you know, things like that.
I love Keeper. I don't think I've ever talked about that before, but I love Keeper. And I think there's a line in Keeper that when I talk with people in real life, I think you talk about, I think Kodiak says to the doctor at one point, like, if they want to kill you,
yeah,
they're gonna kill you.
They're gonna get you.
Yeah, I use that all the time. It's one of my favorite parts.
No,
of the book.
it's and it's weird because I mean, you know, I don't write a good mystery. I never have. And even my first novel was supposed to be a private eye novel. It's about a bodyguard. So I sort of dodged the mystery bullet, you know, and end up writing suspense thrillers anyway. But yeah, and there's a truism in protection, which is if somebody wants you dead, they're going to do it. I mean, if they don't care, if they're willing to die for it, then you're in trouble. You know, there are only so many places, and you can only become so safe. And I suppose there's that. You know, I worked on ambulance when I was in college and following college, and one of the things that I think I was very aware of. One of the things you learn very early in emergency medicine is that violence is incredibly random. And just like life is random, violence is sort of that, is really, I guess, in its own way, the pointed tip of that randomness of creation. And it makes no sense. And even for those people who have facility with violence, you know, you can't control it. You just can't. I always tend to think about whenever I hurt somebody, whenever I'm writing stuff that is quote unquote realistic, I'm very careful about injuries, right? Because I know exactly how bad these things can be. But at the same time, you can literally shoot something. I when I was in EMS, I heard there was a story making the rounds about some kid who got shot something like 12 times in the chest. This is in New York City, and it was down by Washington Square Park, and there was a rig nearby that got there within like 2 minutes. And the kid was declared, you know, dead. They started CPR. They couldn't effect useful CPR because the heart had been punctured. One of the techs had to plug the holes to do compressions. And they got the kid at that point. St. Vincent's Hospital was still open. It's closed now. I don't know. But it was a short ride. They got into St. Vincent's. Kid walked out of the hospital 2 weeks later. It was 2 weeks. Yeah, I mean, the trauma team was ready. They cracked the chest. They sewed him up. And 2 weeks later, he walked out. Now, at the same time, you can shoot somebody in the hand and kill them dead. So I suppose, you know, in the same sense, and you'll hear a lot of people talk about crime, like at least I've heard a lot of people in sort of a literati sense talk about crime as it's an examination of trying to, instill, bring order to a chaotic universe. And so I suppose all of that's true. When we talk about how chaotic violence is, I just, I think for my own parts, I'm just trying to understand stuff,
So being privy to all this information and being an emergency, helping out with that kind of stuff, that kind of drove you towards it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wanted to, I wanted to write, and I wanted to write PI fiction, and I educated myself in it. I had started with the Parker Spencer novels, and it was from Spencer I worked back and back and back and back, all the way to the point where, after I'd finished Chandler, I went back and read Joseph Conrad, and when I was going into my senior year in college, I had declared as an English major we were going to have to do a senior thesis. You would take a senior symposium that last year, and that would sort of direct your thesis. And I had tried to get into any of the creative writing programs, and I never got into any of the classes. So my senior year, I figured, all right, my thesis is not going to be able to be a creative one, because the only way you could do a creative thesis was if you got into the senior composition class, and I hadn't gotten into anything for the prior 3 years. It wasn't going to happen. So I mean, my thesis was going to be the American Private Investigator as a means of social commentary from Chandler to Parker. I mean, that was the title of it, and I was doing the research. One of the things I love about that genre is that the PI is a uniquely American genre. That's a whole other panel we can do on that, and I can hold forth on. But and then I got into this comp class, so I didn't end up writing that. I ended up doing a lot of creative work that year. So.
What was your thesis then?
My thesis was a collection of short stories called Threshold for Pain.
All right.
Question well answered.
Shades of things to come.
And now, what about your titles? Lazarus. You have Lazarus and
Yeah, Lazarus and Stumptown, I guess, are
your big crime.
yeah, kind of, well, and Whiteout, and Gotham Central.
Yeah.
Lazarus is weird because the whole world is kind of criminal in its own way.
Like
and
this
then,
one.
And then Stumptown is just my love letter to the Rockford Files. I mean, it's just a great big gooey, syrupy, I love you, James Garner, series. That's all it is. So.
Very cool. Now, have any of you guys ever worked together before?
Almost.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah.
Almost is a great one.
Yeah, there's, again, stuff we can't talk about, but
That's
We've
our
been in a
favorite
room where
stuff.
we've, argued with each other.
yeah, yeah. But no, I think we're all sort of working in our own little caves.
Yeah.
So,
Just kind of the nature of the job, anyway.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, at any random interval, anybody, if you guys want to answer, what really makes a good crime comic? Like, is it the characters? Is it your
Oh, man.
storyline? Is it the crime?
I think for me personally, it has to be characters first. Like, and that's not just for crime, but for anything. Like, you can't just tell people like, here's your hero. You have to care about this person now. Like, you have to like build a real person, somebody that you care about as you're writing it. Otherwise, like, you're just making stuff up to make stuff up. Like, there's no investment in it. So
Well, yeah, it gets, man, you guys, when you read stuff, you know when it's hollow, I mean, because it sounds hollow. To me, it's always about, to me, all writing is about character, though.
So when you're thinking up these characters, do you guys like honestly think of them from life to death, their entire life, before you even throw them out there?
No.
no. I feel like if like I can, like, if I get the character that's supposed to be in my story, and then like once I get that established, then I can sort of only in my head like work backwards, and like the main character of High Crimes, like I didn't think about her. I vaguely thought about her past, but like it was a thing where like suddenly I had realized like, oh, she which is topical to you, she grew up in New Jersey, like,
Oh,
so
look at that.
like, and that it's a very small thing and it does not in any way come into play in the book, but like it's just another little thing where I'm like, okay, like I know this person. It's like, you know, meeting someone for the first time. Like you slowly learn stuff about them. So
Yeah. I think Joe Quesada at a panel one time talked about that you know, when you meet someone for the first time, you don't immediately hear their life story. You know, they don't spew it all out to them. You learn bits and pieces, and you learn through not just what they're, and a lot of times not through what they're saying, but their actions. You know, people will totally tell you the opposite of what they're really like, and then you learn things about them. With me, when I'm working on the characters, I try to think a lot about what their motivation is. Like with Ghosted, the main guy Jackson, he's supposed to be left alone. He actually doesn't really have a death wish. He just has accepted that his death is coming soon, and he's sort of at terms with that. And then I was able to work my way around that to start building his story, his arc.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I don't need their whole life mapped out, but I need to know why they are who they are. You know,
And what they
I
want.
think, yeah, I mean, for me to write them, I have to know who they are. You know, it's a person. You're writing a person, and you hope that other people, you know, at least relate to them or like them. I mean, the most convoluted plot doesn't mean anything if the people carrying it out are paper dolls.
Right.
You know, with like Vic Boone, you know, he's kind of a butthole to people, and it's because he, you know, ripped out his knee because he was a motorcycle daredevil. So he's always, you know, that's his life, you know, event that made him what he is because he feels that he can't do what he loved, you know, and by default he becomes a private eye. But so yeah, I think it's the characters. I think you have to have great characters. I mean, you can tell the most mundane story if it has great characters in it, you know. I mean, people might not be like, oh, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread, but you know, you think about, I mean, you know, Moby Dick is about a guy who chases a whale. You know,
Yeah.
nobody's lining up to be like, man, that sounds awesome. But once
Yeah.
it's written down, it is because the characters are interesting.
It's got a history with that whale.
Yeah, and that's why you can take some things like, you know, the Heart of Darkness or Apocalypse Now, and you can, you know, move things around, but those characters are still so strong that we identify immediately, you know, because yeah, it's not the world, it's the characters. Greg said something a few weeks back that has been like haunting me ever since, was the bigger the world, the smaller the story, right?
Yeah, I mean, the more complex the mythology, the simpler the story should be.
Yeah.
And I do think that until the rules have been understood by the audience, you're asking a hell of a lot. You know, I mean, great example is, you know, if you've seen Outland, right, the Sean Connery movie Outland. Outland's high noon. That's all it is. It is high noon, literally high noon. They just said, let's set it on Io. You know, okay, great. And the details of the world, the science that makes it possible to tell that story, are irrelevant to the movie. I mean, they really are irrelevant. The narrative still drives.
So how do you come up with a good crime? Like, what's that good crime? What's not going to
I
make it
don't.
cliche?
I let the world does it for me.
Yeah, the real life, man.
I don't need to come up with anything.
Yeah, I mean, there's always that thing at the beginning of like any Law and Order, but it's really what it is. You know, it's stuff you see. It's out there. That's where it kind of comes from.
I had an idea that I'm sure 5,000 other writers have thought of, and I don't know why it took me so long to get there. And I was sitting just like 2 nights ago, and I was winding down for the night, and I'm looking at the Twitter feed, and I see somebody has said, so this is going on, and I follow the link, and it's the shootings in Chicago. And I found myself almost immediately thinking, you know, there's a story about a guy who goes out and buys himself a couple guns and starts shooting people simply because he has seen it happen so many times that he's hoping he'll be the guy who actually gets the legislation passed to ban it. Like, he's snapped enough, and he's like, if I kill enough people, they'll have to ban the gun. I am not, by a long shot, the first writer or the first person who's ever gone, hey, there's a story in that.
Well, we're all criminals, basically, in a way. Like, we're just criminals. We're criminals who have, instead of committing the crimes, we wrote them down. That's what it is. That's what we. So a lot of our day is spent. You know, any character in our books, the real supervillain or the real villain is us, because we're spending the entire day trying to find ways of killing them. You know, it's the same thing with all these books and these crime novels and everything. It's like it's us just thinking of these crimes and then just not committing them, just writing about them.
Yeah, I can't lie, you four scare me more than most.
What was that, Greg?
So commit them safely.
Yeah, that you know of.
Yeah, these four minds collectively are terrifying, is what they're trying to say.
Grant Morrison would argue that we've all done everything that we're thinking of.
Yeah, the only thing I would worry about by doing it is making sure it wasn't cliche, and I mean, how you stay away from that, what's not been done. I mean, everything's been done.
Yeah, but that's precisely the point. I think you spend too much time worrying about what cliche is. The fact that cliche, something is cliche because it was inherently true, and it was so true that it got used over and over again. Any good writing is the stripping away of artifice and the revelation of a truth. So, is it cliche that the butler did it? Yes. Make me believe in the butler and the reasons why he did it, and it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's how you get there.
Yeah.
Very awesome. So just moving on through all those, is there any suggestions to people that would want to do this, want to get into this? Like, what is I know that's a cliche question for a panel, but do you have any advice for someone that would want to get into this or anything like that?
First, commit crimes.
Yeah.
Read and then write.
Yeah.
That's what you
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, I think having a screwed up childhood helps too, because at least everybody I know in comics, or at least that I know well enough to know their backstory, they're all sort of broken in one way or another.
Yeah, have a story to tell. I think I was saying this the other day that no one ever really maybe I've been wrong about what I'm about to say, but no one ever writes the stories about the person that had it easy. The person that constantly floated and there was no ups and downs in your life. But we all have that. We all have rejection as ups and downs. You write about it. That's part of the way of dealing with it. But have a story to tell and try to like he said, I think reading and writing, but just write about it.
You need to do a lot more reading than you think. You need to read outside of genre and outside of medium. If you want to write comics, don't read only comics.
Mm-hmm.
Read some comics, and then I don't know. I feel very strongly that if you can write a good short story, if you can tell a story that has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and stick the landing within 3,000 words, you can write almost anything.
Yeah, try to write Twilight Zone episodes.
Yeah.
If you can do that, that's where whenever I talk to people who are trying to break in or trying to write, I always say think about Twilight Zone episodes. If you can start there, I mean, those things are perfect. It's beginning, middle, and end, and they have a little punch at the end.
I mean, look at, I always go back to Hemingway. You can hate Hemingway, you can love Hemingway, but you need to understand why people go. He's one of the greatest short story writers ever. You need to understand how the stories work. And the way you do that is by experiencing lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of different stories.
Mm-hmm. That was actually my next question. Who are your favorite, writers in not particularly, I mean, more particularly in the crime? I know you're a big PI guy, and as you guys went down the line, everyone had their kind of own little thing, but who do you suggest to read? Who should we go out there and go find?
Start down there, I gotta think.
I knew you were gonna do that to me. I don't know. You just mentioned Hemingway. I would have to say Hemingway. That's probably my favorite. I'm thinking who else. I was thinking about this the whole panel. I was trying to think of my brain.
You knew it was coming, didn't you?
Yeah, I knew that question was going to come up because it's always the one I always have a challenge with, and I always forget. I'll always late hours later be like, I should have said this.
That's it.
Because this is way better.
Go home and look on the bookshelf and be like, yeah, all of them.
Yeah.
Should
I
we
like
come
the
back
Parker
to you?
novels a lot. The Parker novels definitely influenced me a lot.
You're talking about Westlake.
Yeah, Westlake. Yeah. Sorry.
Let's see. For me, I guess Chekhov is up there.
Chester Himes.
Yeah, Chester Himes, obviously. I'm a big Southern fiction fan. I mean, because I was born in the South, but the two don't necessarily go together. I know a lot of people I grew up with who don't read or can't read.
Yeah.
But there's a Japanese author who sort of invented modern Japanese short stories fiction called Akutagawa. Kurosawa, one of his movies is based on one of his short stories. Rashomon, which is actually not based on the story Rashomon, it's based on the story in the Grove. I would suggest anybody to read his short stories. They're short, they're precise, they deliver characters, and it's a good study of how to do stuff. And so those guys, yeah. Hemingway, I guess I could say Hemingway. Yeah. I mean, he's good. He's a little machismo for me, but he writes
a little.
yeah, you know. But I mean, he's great at what he does, and I'll never, you know.
I guess an author I love who nobody has ever read. His name is Will Christopher Bayer, and he wrote what's called the Phineas Poe trilogy, which the first book is about a ex-cop who just gets out of a mental hospital, meets a woman in a bar who steals his kidney, and then he falls in love with her and is chasing her across the country as she has his kidney in a cooler. And the author wrote these 3 books, had a 4th book in the works. He pulled it from the publisher and has disappeared. Like, you cannot find a trace of him past like 2004 on the internet. So that's like, those are books like I come back to again and again. It's like I tend to drift towards darker, more messed up stuff, I guess. But like my foundation is Dashiell Hammett. Like the Continental Ops stories are sort of, that's where, like, that's the foundation for me. Like, everything sort of builds off that. And if I could, like, it's not even that he writes really good crime stuff. Like, he writes really hilarious lines. Like, everybody is like at the top of their game in his books. And then beyond that, like, I read.
He also writes beautifully.
Yeah, and beyond that, like, I just read a ton of nonfiction more than anything, just because you can pick out, like, I've come up with really good ideas just out of like marginalia in books. So for me, that's helpful. Also, I learn about really horrible things that I would never actually do. So.
I see him thinking down there.
Yeah, I mean, are we talking about? It's funny you were talking. You just made me think of something. There's some. I love doing research. There are some things once you know you can't unknow. It sounds funny. I'm thinking about an article I read about 2-3 weeks ago that was a description of a crime, and I've got a pretty strong stomach, and this thing still makes me shake. When I think back on it, we're talking about just the fictional sources, the writers. You know, yeah, we talked about Hemingway, Stephen Crane. I love. I think nobody wrote violence the way Stephen Crane could depict violence. I love Raymond Chandler for all of the many problems that Raymond Chandler is. I think The Long Goodbye is one of the greatest novels ever written. Lawrence Block, who's contemporary, still writing. 8 Million Ways to Die is one of my favorite PI novels. A lot of people prefer When the Sacred Gin Mill Closes. I prefer 8 Million Ways to Die. Don't see the movie, they screwed it up. Tim O'Brien. Has anybody read Tim O'Brien? You talk about Hemingway's short stories, and then you read The Things They Carried by Tim O'Brien. I think Tim O'Brien is brilliant. I love what he can do with words. The story Sweetheart of the Song Trebong is like one of my all-time favorite stories ever. But, you know, the thing is, look, you find what you love, you know? I love reading Rex Stout, right? The Nero Wolfe stories. These are not complex books. These are the equivalent of taking a long, hot soak in a very nice bath. But there's a place for that, you know, as there is a place for reading Joyce Carol Oates, who incidentally writes some of the scariest stuff out there. Read Joyce Carol Oates, man, oh my God. P.D. James, we didn't even talk about this. Is a whole other thing. I firmly believe women crime writers, infinitely more terrifying than anything guys can come up with.
Deviant.
No,
Is the correct word.
And I think it's entirely societal. You read Ruth Rendell. No, I've never read any story scarier than Ruth Rendell stories, because guys go through society, we go through the days, and I don't really look at an iron and get terrified by it. I worry about it if it's on, right? But the nature of society is most women look at an iron and go, oh, there's so many ways to die with this thing. There's so much pain here, Most guys go scissors for cutting paper.
Yeah.
Most women go, no, that's not what they're used for. That's a secondary function. You know what I mean? I mean, seriously, and you read P.D. James, Ruth Rendell, Joyce Carol Oates, scare the shit out of you.
Yeah, actually, do you know Chelsea Kane?
Yes.
Like,
there's,
I just
there's
started-
Chelsea.
Yeah.
Local girl, Chelsea.
Yeah. I've sort of become friends with her, but I read her, so like I knew her at first, and she's just like bright, lively, fun to be around. And then I read her Archie and Gretchen series, and I was like, this woman is messed up. Like, there's stuff in that book that just like makes me cringe. And then you meet her, and like. And also, like, if you're going around Portland with her, she'll be like, "Oh yeah, I killed somebody there." Yeah. Like,
Everybody there. Do we want to do? Do we want to?
I'm going to do a little bit. I'm only going to leave a couple minutes for it, but I just have one more question. Now, everybody hit on novels and your favorites. And did anybody look towards any movies? Now, I know most great movies come from a book, but anybody going towards the movies? Anybody? No, not just making movies,
I love
but
Chinatown. It's
yeah,
a cliche.
pulling
I
from
love
movies.
Chinatown.
Yeah.
I also like the Two Jakes, though, because I see the Two Jakes for the sequel it is meant to be.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a sequel. It's quite literally sequentially later,
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, anybody pull from any good movies? Anybody really enjoy some great crime movies?
Double Indemnity.
Miller's Crossing.
The Friends of Eddie Coyle.
75% of Heat.
What did I
Is that an
just?
interesting statement?
The Man Who Knew Too Much.
The man who, actually both versions, but I prefer the second. Yeah.
I'll probably go a little more modern and not as. I really like Pulp Fiction. Like I just watched it recently, and I was realizing how much of it influenced me.
Well, I'd say any of the early films that Graham Greene wrote, actually.
Oh,
To
The Third
bring it
Man.
back. Yeah, The Third Man.
Oh my
That was
God,
my
The
thing.
Third Man.
Just watched that and couldn't remember it.
One of the greatest, that wonderful Harry Lime bit about, in Italy under the Borgias, for 30 years they had terror, murder, terror, murder, destruction. They produced
The Renaissance.
Leonardo, and what else? Art, literature, and the Renaissance. And Switzerland, they had peace and harmony for 500 years, brotherly love, and what did that get them? The cuckoo clock. Vintage Graham Greene. The Quiet American, speaking of Graham Greene. Brighton Rock. I mean, brilliant books.
Very awesome. We're going to move over to our other guests over here and see if anybody
Oh,
has
hi.
any questions
How long
or
have you
anything
been
you want to
here?
ask. Yeah, now that we're all done talking to each other.
I'm just wondering, when you get an idea, is it intrinsic to the idea that it's a crime book idea, or do you sometimes get an idea that I wonder if this idea or this character is a horror book or a sci-fi book or crime? Is it a crime intrinsic to the idea from the beginning, or
No,
does it come
I
in later?
mean, not me personally. Like, I feel like you can. There's no I don't have this sort of purity of like this is a crime book. The reason I like Ghosted is that it's not just a crime book. It's also a horror book and a suspense book. And the reason I like Lazarus is that it's a sci-fi book as well as a crime book. I personally I feel like as many different things you can touch on and still make the story work. That sort of is what interests me most, is trying to merge crime with other stuff.
Yeah. And you don't want to be a slave to that genre. I mean, I think that's horrible if you start off a story and you're like, this is going to be a horror story, and then the story starts to take shape and it's going in a direction you may not expect, and then you try to rein it in to make it a slave to this genre decision you had. I think that's a horrible decision. I did a kid's book. Called Dear Dracula. It was straight up a horror comic when I started it. It was going to be a regular old horror book, and then I started talking to a friend of mine, and as it started developing, it became this super like ages, you know, like I think it's like 4 to 8 kindergarten, like little kids book. You know, it totally took a different shape, and I'm like really happy with the way it turned out. But there was a time. It's funny because me and the artist will joke around about. There was a time where it was like super bloody. You know, it was not at all what it ends up being in the end. But I'm really like thankful for that, because if I had not gone the direction that my heart was telling me to, I would have ended up with a piece of junk, being a slave to just the genre. Like, no.
Yeah, you gotta let the characters go where they're gonna go.
Yeah. Be true to the characters.
Yeah,
Really,
I mean, they've got a journey that they want to take, and sometimes you think you know it when you're going in. That's not the case.
You need writers will. I did a panel at a crime convention once where I was sitting up with like 3 other authors, and I started writing. I got published as a novelist long before I actually had comics in print, and I was pretty young, so I'm always, there was a period where I was always the youngest guy up there, and I remember them sitting there, and one guy saying, they were all so fucking full of themselves, pardon my language. And, I mean, they were so full of themselves, and one of them was like, he was a psychologist as well, and he made the comment about how, people talk about how the characters will begin speaking to them, and that's just absurd, and really, if that's happening to you, you should seek help. And I remember sitting there and being like, wow, talk about not getting the point. Yeah. I remember sitting there getting angry, because my characters do talk to me. And if you listen, and that this whole thing about I am God and they do what I want, it's like then your writing is bad. Yeah. Your writing is bad. Because if you are not granting your characters the ability to make decisions, of course you craft your story. But the character is the engine that drives it. This is the rudest example I can give is that Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman all go to a bank robbery. Each of them stops it in a different way. That's character. That's character. And if you have done a good job creating your character, they'll tell you what they want. And they'll fight you if you try to get them to do something they don't. And that's more to the point. It's easier to follow them. You will suddenly find yourself going like, why is the story no longer working? It was going and now it's broken. And it'll be because one of your characters is sitting there going, because you're an idiot. I had a novel do that on me. I had Critical Space did that on me. You're talking about Kodiak stuff. Critical Space, when I started it, I had an ending in mind. And I got to the halfway point, and every character in the book literally went on strike. It was as if they all stood up and said, we're leaving. Work it out. We'll be back when you get it. But we have given you terms, and you're not listening to us. And I did. I ended up taking 2 weeks off and going on a research binge. I was going to the Oregon Ballet. They had a brown bag lunch thing where you could bring a lunch and watch them rehearse over the lunch hour. And I was taking notes and all this stuff because all the characters had really said, we know where you think we're going, and that ain't where we're going. So get it right.
Can't push them around or they'll push back.
No, well, not only that, but you get ugly. You get something that doesn't, like I said, it's hollow.
So does anybody else have any questions? No? Well,
Nice anecdote for you.
yeah. Oh, it's actually perfect timing. We're going to thank these gentlemen for coming up here and doing a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let them get on with their very long day and long weekend. And you guys, I appreciate you talking to me for a couple minutes.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Everyone enjoy their con.